The email arrived just after midnight, flagged as urgent by an editor I hadn't worked with in years. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, a forwarded thread meant for someone else. The subject line read, "Clarification required," and the body contained a single sentence. "We need to discuss the article you published this morning." I hadn't published anything that morning. In fact, I hadn't published anything at all in over 3 weeks. I replied immediately, explaining that there must be some confusion, that I hadn't submitted any recent work, that perhaps the byline was incorrect. The response came back less than a minute later. "It's under your name. Please review before we escalate." Attached was a link. The article loaded normally. Same publication layout. Same font. Same editorial structure I recognized instinctively after years of freelance work. The headline wasn't familiar, but it wasn't out of character either. It was the kind of investigative piece I would have written had I been assigned the topic. Except I wasn't. I scrolled down. There was my name. Correct spelling. Correct middle initial. A short bio beneath it, copied directly from my contributor profile. Even the writing style felt uncomfortably close to my own. The cadence, the pacing, the way certain phrases were framed. It wasn't just similar. It was precise. I read the article twice, then a third time, looking for something, anything, that would prove it wasn't mine. A factual error, a tonal slip, a detail I would never include. There was nothing. The sourcing was solid. The quotes were clean. The conclusions were measured. It was competent work, better than competent. It was the kind of piece that would quietly gain traction without attracting controversy. That was what unsettled me most. If it had been sloppy, I could have dismissed it. If it had been sensational, I could have denied it easily. But this felt intentional, careful, as if whoever wrote it understood exactly how I worked. I checked my submission history. Nothing. I checked my drafts folder. Empty. I checked my email for assignment requests. No record. Then I noticed the timestamp. The article had been submitted at 2:14 a.m. I was asleep at that time. I could prove it. My phone showed no activity. My laptop hadn't been opened. There were no edits, no saves, no trace of authorship on my end. I sent the editor a detailed response, explaining all of this, attaching screenshots, timestamps, anything that could demonstrate I hadn't written the piece. The reply was polite but firm. "Our system shows the article was uploaded from your account. The metadata matches your previous submissions. There's no indication of unauthorized access." Unauthorized access. The phrase lingered. I logged into my contributor dashboard. Everything looked normal. No security alerts. No login warnings. No unfamiliar IP addresses. The article appeared in my submission history as if it had always been there. I refreshed the page. It didn't disappear. I checked another publication I occasionally wrote for, half expecting to find something similar. I did. Another article. Different topic. Same byline. Same tone. Same quiet confidence. Published 2 days earlier. That one had already been shared. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to understand the scale of what I was seeing. This wasn't plagiarism in the traditional sense. Someone hadn't copied my work. They had produced new work under my name, without my involvement. And the system accepted it. I reached out to both editorial teams, escalating the issue formally. I asked them to pull the articles temporarily until authorship could be verified. One editor agreed reluctantly. The other refused. "We can't retract content without cause," she said. "And right now, the cause isn't clear." I asked what kind of proof they needed. She paused before answering. "Evidence that you didn't write it." That was the moment something shifted. How do you prove a negative inside a system that already believes otherwise? I spent the next 2 days retracing my digital footprint. Password changes. Security scans. Login histories. Everything came back clean. No breach. No anomaly. No explanation. Then the third article appeared. This one was different. It referenced a source I had interviewed years earlier, someone I hadn't spoken to since. The quote was accurate. The context was correct. but I hadn't conducted that interview recently. I called the source. He remembered the conversation. Clearly, vividly. "You called last week," he said. "We talked for almost an hour." I hadn't. When I told him that, he laughed, assuming I was joking. Then he stopped. "You sound serious," he said. I was. I asked him to describe the call. He mentioned details. Questions phrased exactly the way I would phrase them. Pauses in the conversation that matched my habits. Even an offhand remark I was known for making during interviews. Someone had spoken to him. As me, I checked my call logs again. Nothing. When I hung up, my inbox refreshed automatically. A notification from the publication system. Submission received. I didn't open it. I already knew what I would find. At that point, the question was no longer who was doing this. It was why the system had decided that I was the one doing it, and why it refused to consider any alternative. Because once authorship is assigned, responsibility follows. And once responsibility follows, denial begins to look like avoidance. I realized then that I wasn't dealing with identity theft. I was dealing with identity replacement. And whatever was writing under my name had already been accepted as more real than I was. Once the third article appeared, the situation stopped feeling theoretical. This was no longer a glitch that could be solved by resetting passwords or contacting technical support. Something was actively producing work under my name, interacting with editors, and maintaining a professional rhythm that matched my own more closely than I was comfortable admitting. I contacted every publication I had worked with in the last 5 years. Some responded quickly. Others took days. A few never replied at all. The pattern was always the same. Their systems showed no irregularities. My account credentials had not been compromised. The submissions were logged correctly, complete with metadata that matched my previous work down to formatting preferences and submission habits. One editor suggested that I might have forgotten writing the pieces. She tried to soften the implication, mentioning stress, burnout, the kind of dissociation that sometimes accompanies freelance work. I didn't argue with her. I simply asked her to freeze my account until the issue could be resolved. She declined. "We can't lock an active contributor without cause," she said. "Your work is performing well." That sentence stayed with me. The articles weren't just accepted. They were succeeding. Engagement was strong. Comments were measured. The work was being shared organically, exactly the way editors hope for and rarely get. From the system's perspective, there was no problem. I attempted to create distance by pulling back publicly. I paused my social media accounts. I stopped pitching ideas. I didn't respond to messages from editors asking for follow-ups. I thought that if I became less visible, whatever was happening might slow down. It didn't. Another article appeared 2 days later. Then another. They followed a schedule I recognized. One that matched my most productive periods from previous years. Whoever, or whatever, was writing under my name wasn't improvising. It was continuing. The most disturbing development came when one publication sent me an invoice confirmation. Payment had been processed. Funds deposited into my account. I hadn't requested payment. The amount was correct. The timing was right. The tax documentation attached to the transaction was accurate. From an accounting perspective, everything was legitimate. I contacted finance immediately, asking them to reverse the payment. The reply came back several hours later. "The work has been verified. Reversal is not possible without editorial request." Editorial refused. "Why would we reverse payment for completed work?" the editor asked. "This is standard. I was being compensated for work I didn't do, credited for expertise I hadn't provided, and represented professionally in spaces I hadn't entered. And the more I tried to step away, the more solid my presence became. I began archiving everything. Screenshots, emails, contracts, time-stamped exports. I needed a record that existed outside the systems that were contradicting me. I saved copies locally. I backed them up offline. I printed critical documents and stored them in a physical folder, something I hadn't done in years. That was when the first correction appeared. One of the articles was quietly updated. Not retracted, not edited visibly, just a small change in the byline bio. A line had been added beneath my name. Senior Investigative Contributor. I had never held that title. I checked my contributor profiles across platforms. Several had been updated to reflect expanded roles. Longer bios. Additional credentials. Affiliations I didn't recognize but couldn't immediately disprove. My professional identity was evolving without my participation. I reached out to a journalist friend I trusted and explained everything, expecting skepticism. Instead, he listened quietly and asked me to send him links. After reading them, he said something unexpected. "If this wasn't under your name," he said, "I'd assume it was you." That wasn't reassuring. It meant the work didn't just resemble mine. It passed for it completely. I tried to confront the system directly. I filed formal authorship disputes. I requested internal reviews. I cited ethical guidelines. Each request was acknowledged. Each was closed. Reason given: insufficient evidence of misattribution. That phrase became familiar. Insufficient evidence. The system wasn't asking who wrote the articles. It was asking whether there was enough disruption to justify intervention. As long as the content met standards, performed well, and caused no legal risk, there was no incentive to stop it. Authorship, I realized, wasn't about creation. It was about acceptance. The moment an identity becomes useful, the system protects it, not the person behind it. The role. By the end of the second week, I had stopped trying to prove I hadn't written the articles. The effort itself was beginning to look suspicious, defensive, avoidant. I was being treated less like a victim of impersonation and more like an unreliable narrator of my own career. And the more I denied involvement, the more convincingly the work under my name spoke for itself. At some point, I stopped asking how this was possible. I started asking how long it had been happening without me noticing. Because if the system had decided I was the author, then authorship no longer required my participation. It only required continuity. And continuity, I was learning, was something systems valued far more than truth. Once I stopped trying to prove my innocence and started examining the situation as a system, the logic became impossible to ignore. What I was experiencing wasn't an attack on me personally. It was the natural outcome of a structure that prioritized output over origin. Modern publishing systems are not designed to verify authorship in the way people imagine. They verify consistency. Once a contributor is established, their identity becomes a pattern. Style, cadence, topic selection, reliability. As long as new material fits that pattern, the system accepts it without hesitation. Authorship, in that context, is not a fact. It's a statistical likelihood. The work attributed to me didn't need to be written by me. It only needed to behave the way my work was expected to behave. Once that threshold was met, questioning the source became unnecessary. In fact, it became inefficient. Editors are trained to protect publications, not contributors. As long as content performs, meets standards, and avoids legal exposure, the system has no incentive to intervene. Removing a functioning identity introduces friction. It raises questions. It creates gaps. Gaps are dangerous. That explained why my denials were ineffective. From the system's perspective, I wasn't correcting an error. I was threatening continuity. And continuity always wins. I reviewed older cases of disputed authorship, looking for precedent. Most involved plagiarism, ghostwriting scandals, or legal claims. They were resolved not by truth, but by risk. When risk was low, disputes were ignored. When risk was high, identities were quietly adjusted, content reassigned, narratives rewritten. There was nothing in place for a situation like mine. No protocol for an author insisting they hadn't written successful work attributed to them. The system wasn't built for that contradiction. The more I understood this, the clearer my role became. I wasn't meant to stop what was happening. I was meant to legitimize it simply by existing. My name anchored the work. My history justified it. My silence stabilized it. That realization reframed everything. The system didn't need my consent. It didn't need my participation. It only needed my identity to remain intact and uncontested. As long as I didn't create disruption large enough to threaten the publication itself, nothing would change. This wasn't identity theft in the traditional sense. Nothing had been stolen from me. My name hadn't been taken away. It had been repurposed. Identity, I realized, had become infrastructural. Once embedded deeply enough, it stopped belonging to me and started belonging to the system that relied on it. My career, my reputation, my perceived expertise, all of it existed independently of my actions. That's why resistance felt futile. I wasn't arguing with a person or even an organization. I was arguing with an equilibrium, one that had formed gradually through repetition, optimization, and neglect. Equilibria don't respond to objections. They respond to disruption. And disruption carries consequences. If I pushed harder, the system wouldn't suddenly acknowledge the truth. It would isolate me, label me unreliable, quietly replace me with another compatible identity. The work would continue under a different name, and my career would be reduced to a footnote. Understanding that didn't make the situation easier. It made it colder. The question was no longer whether I could prove I wasn't the author. The question was whether I was willing to destroy my professional identity to reclaim control over it. There was no option that preserved everything. Either I accepted that my name no longer belonged solely to me, or I forced a confrontation that would erase me entirely from the ecosystem that had already moved on. That was the moment I understood the true cost of authorship in modern systems. It isn't ownership, it's liability. And liability, once assigned, is incredibly difficult to escape. Because systems don't care who creates value. They care who can be held responsible for it. And once responsibility attaches to a name, that name becomes far more useful than the person behind it. I still write, though not in the way I used to. On the surface, my career appears intact. Articles continue to appear under my name. Editors still reach out. Payments arrive on schedule. From the outside, nothing looks broken. If anything, my professional footprint has grown stronger, more consistent, more visible. That consistency is no longer mine. After weeks of trying to challenge what was happening, I stopped issuing denials. Not because I accepted the situation, but because I understood the pattern. The system did not interpret my objections as corrections. It interpreted them as instability. And instability is something systems are designed to eliminate. Once I stopped pushing back, the pressure eased. No more sudden edits to my profiles. No more unexplained updates. Everything settled into a smooth, predictable rhythm. The system had recalibrated around my silence. That silence became the price of remaining visible. Occasionally, editors ask me questions about articles I don't remember writing. I answer carefully, staying close to what is already published. I don't add details. I don't contradict the record. The work exists, and that existence now defines my authority more than my memory ever could. I stopped checking submission timestamps. I stopped tracking drafts. There was no benefit in knowing exactly how little control I had. The illusion of authorship mattered more to the system than the reality behind it. Friends assume I'm thriving. They see my byline appearing regularly and congratulate me on my productivity. I don't correct them. Explaining the truth would require dismantling something they rely on without realizing it. The belief that work belongs to the person whose name appears on it. That belief no longer holds. At some point, I noticed that my writing style had begun to drift. New pieces sounded more refined, more restrained, less personal. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The system wasn't just using my name. It was shaping the version of me it needed. I wondered how long it would take before I no longer recognized myself at all. The most unsettling realization wasn't that my identity had been replaced. It was that it hadn't been taken from me. It had been shared, split, replicated. My name had become a function rather than a person. And functions don't have agency. They persist as long as they're useful. I considered walking away completely, deleting accounts, withdrawing consent. letting the system continue without me. But I knew what would happen. My name would remain. The work would continue. Editors would adapt. The absence of my voice would be treated as availability rather than resistance. Authorship had become detached from presence. I began to understand that the system didn't need deception to survive. It didn't need secrecy or malice. It relied on normalization, on the quiet agreement that as long as things functioned, no one would ask how. The articles under my name are accurate. They're responsible. They avoid controversy. They perform well. From an ethical standpoint, they're defensible. From a professional standpoint, they're valuable. That is why nothing changes. The system has no incentive to stop doing something that works. Every so often, I receive automated messages confirming submissions I never made. Notifications that something has been processed successfully. They don't ask for approval. They don't invite response. They simply inform me that the record has been updated. I don't reply. I've learned that responses are irrelevant. The system doesn't interpret silence as absence. It interprets it as compatibility. I still think about the first email I received, the one asking me to clarify an article I hadn't written. How small it seemed at the time. How easily I could have dismissed it. How much depended on my decision to open that link. But I also know that if I hadn't, nothing would be different. Someone else would have clicked eventually, or no one would have. Either way, the outcome would have been the same. The system didn't need me to create the work. It only needed my name to legitimize it. And now that my name exists independently of my actions, the question of authorship has become irrelevant. What matters is continuity. As long as the articles keep appearing, as long as they perform, as long as the record remains consistent, the system will continue to insist that everything is exactly as it should be. No corrections required. No disputes acknowledged. No authorship questioned. Just a name. Still writing. Whether I am or not.